The record reflect we are back in session. Parties and counsel are present. All members of our jury and our alternates are present. And defense may call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Defense calls Susanna Ryan.
I do. My name is Susanna Ryan. It's SUZANNARYAN.
Okay, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Ryan.
Good morning.
What's your current occupation?
Currently, I'm a forensic DNA consultant, and I'm also laboratory director of a private DNA lab called Pure Gold Forensics in Redlands, California.
Did you have any education to obtain your position you have now?
I did.
And can you detail your education for the jury?
Sure. I have a Bachelor of Science in Biology with a minor in chemistry, and that's from Lock Haven University in Lock Haven, Pennsylvania. I also have a Master of Science in Forensic Science from Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia.
Now, after you received your degrees, what was your first job? Well, let's go through your employment experience, let's say that. What was your first job you had that was DNA related?
All right. So the first job I had, DNA related, was with the Bode Technology Group, it's BODE, and that is a private DNA lab. They're located in Virginia. I started working for them in January of '99, and I worked for them as, well, initially I had on-the-job training on how to perform forensic DNA casework. Once I went through that training program, which is about 9 months long, then I started doing DNA casework, and I worked for them until 2002.
And what kind of DNA casework did you work on while at Bode Group?
We did, as a private lab, you typically work on cases from both prosecution and defense. So, whoever has the need for the DNA testing, that's the testing we would do. It was STR DNA testing, that stands for short tandem repeats. It's basically the same type of testing that's used today. The only difference is in the number of locations that we look at on the DNA molecule, but it's the same basic process. And I also worked on some projects there, identification of missing persons, worked with the International Commission of Missing Persons to identify individuals in a mass grave in Bosnia, and we also worked on identifying remains from the Alaska Airlines crash in 2000, as well as identification of victims of the World Trade Center disaster.
And so you did work for the federal government when you were with Bode?
Some of it was for the federal government, yes.
And you had to receive any security clearance to work under that contract?
I did, yes. I had, at the time, a top secret security clearance.
And did you ever testify as an expert while you were employed with Bode?
I did, yes.
And approximately how many times did you testify, and could you say to the state or federal court?
Total or just while at Bode?
Just at Bode.
Oh, I'm not sure if I have it broken down in my memory that way. I know.
I'll tell you what, we'll get to the testimony later then.
Okay, all right.
And then after Bode, did you have employment at another lab?
I did, yes.
And where was the next place of employment?
That was with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in Tampa, Florida, in their crime laboratory.
And what did you do there?
I was a forensic DNA analyst, so I did basically the same thing I had been doing while at Bode, but in addition to that, I was also trained on forensic serology, which is the identification of body fluids, so things like blood, semen, saliva, Once I completed that training, then I did both portions of the testing, the serology testing as well as the DNA testing, and I testified in court when needed.
Now, when you worked at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, is it fair to say your analysis was generally law enforcement related?
Generally, yes. I mean, that's where that is who we would receive the evidence from, was various law enforcement agencies in the, I think it was 17 or 18 surrounding counties. And then when I testified, there may have been one time I testified for the defense during that time period, but virtually all my testimony was for the prosecution, or I was called by the prosecution to testify at that time.
Did you ever, in that position, did you ever go out to crime scenes?
Not typically. I did go to one crime scene while employed there. They wanted a DNA analyst on hand to ensure that the samples were collected properly.
And did you ever provide training to any individuals while employed in the Department of Law Enforcement Florida?
I did. I did a couple of different trainings for law enforcement officers as well as forensic sexual assault nurses on how to properly collect DNA, what samples should be collected, how they should be packaged and stored, those sorts of things.
Did you do trainings for the attorneys that worked in the area so you can help them understand what the capabilities are in the testing you can do?
Yes, we would.
And did you ever attend law enforcement meetings to help them as from a standpoint of giving a DNA perspective on, say, like cold cases?
Yes. So there'd be a couple of different times when I would meet with investigators. Sometimes we would meet to discuss a current case and go over the evidence, what was collected, what did they want tested, what, perhaps from a DNA perspective, what might be the best item to test or items to test. And then also I would attend cold case meetings. There was a group of cold case investigators, and I did attend several of those meetings again to talk about DNA testing and what could be tested, what they should be looking for in their evidence.
Now, at your time at Bodie and your time at the Florida Department, were you trained on different kits or mechanisms to use part of DNA analysis?
Yes, so it was all what we call STR testing, or short tandem repeat testing, but there were differences in the chemicals or kits that were used. So I do have kind of a wide variety of experience with different kits that manufacturers provide that have all of the chemicals that we need to do the copying or amplification process. And then there are different ways to analyze the DNA or visualize the DNA. One was with a gel, so think of like a really thin Jell-O almost in between two glass plates. If you load the DNA at the top of that gel, it will travel, and you apply an electrical current, it will travel towards the bottom of the gel, with smaller fragments traveling more quickly than larger fragments. So it's separating out the DNA. So I do have experience with that. And then most of the experience past that point was what we call capillary electrophoresis. So it is a way of separating DNA using a very thin glass tube. And that's basically what most laboratories are using at this time, capillary electrophoresis.
And you were present when Don Jones testified, correct?
I was.
And when he talked about the amplification kits that they used during his testimony, is that what you're referring to?
Right, yes. They used a kit called Identifiler Plus. I'm sorry, Identifiler Plus.
And how long did you work for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
About 3.5 years.
And then where was the next place of employment?
That was with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department in North Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina. I worked in their crime laboratory doing, again, the same thing as I'd done previously, both serology and forensic DNA testing.
And Did you use a different type of amplification kits there as well?
Yes, there we used something called PowerPlex 16, I believe. I've used a lot of different manufacturers' kits and different platforms, we call them different platforms, but they all accomplish the same goal, and that is to obtain a DNA profile and compare that to reference samples.
And what other functions did you perform while you were at the police department there in Charlotte? I'll try to narrow it down. Were you involved in CODIS?
Yes. So both at FDLE in Florida and Charlotte-Mecklenburg County, those were what we consider CODIS labs or ENDIS labs, which basically means they have the ability to upload profiles into the CODIS database, the Combined DNA Index System. So as part of that, as an analyst, you're responsible for interpreting the DNA profiles and getting them ready for upload or uploading them yourself. And so you have to be trained on what samples can be uploaded and how to perform that. And so while at both of those agencies, I did upload profiles into CODIS.
And did you also do technical review of other work?
Yes, and that's something that at every lab that I've worked at, you're expected to not just do DNA analysis, but you technically review other analysts' work to make sure that that they're following all proper policies and procedures, and they tested the appropriate samples and reported the results correctly.
And then, as part of your work, I assume you would also write reports that be reviewed?
Yes.
And were you also involved in homicide investigations while at that department?
Yes.
And how were you involved in any homicide investigations with that department?
As a DNA analyst, there were homicide cases that I worked. We also had the option or opportunity to attend weekly homicide investigators meetings. The, I guess, good thing or benefit of working at that particular lab in Charlotte is that the lab was on the 5th floor and the homicide investigators were on the 2nd floor. And so there could be communication back and forth, and we could attend the meetings as forensic scientists to offer inputs as to what could or should be collected or tested in various crime scenes.
And how long did you work for Charlotte?
I worked for them slightly less than a year. And the reason that it was kind of shorter was I moved to San Diego to take a position as technical leader of a private lab that had opened in San Diego.
And after that, so the next place you worked was at this lab?
Was that what?
Was that lab?
Yes, and it was called Crime Scene Technologies. It was located in San Diego. I was technical leader, and I was also a DNA analyst. So I performed forensic casework, but I was also responsible for implementing the types of testing that we would be performing and validating those procedures, troubleshooting any issues that arose at the lab.
And would you have any work in relation, well, let me ask this. The lab in San Diego, was it accredited?
It was, yes.
And were you involved in maintaining the accreditation for that lab?
Yes, I was also a quality assurance manager, so that meant that I was responsible for maintaining the accreditation, ensuring that all the analysts took their proficiency tests at the appropriate time frames, that we performed all the internal and external audits, things like that.
And were you ever involved in validation studies while in that lab?
I was, yes.
Could you explain to the jury what a validation study is?
So before you begin a certain type of testing or maybe a new extraction procedure or anything that's different or changed, you can't just say, okay, I'm going to do this and let's start on this case. You have to make sure that it works appropriately, that you get the expected results. You need to know how sensitive the test is, how does it perform with mixtures, is there any possibility for contamination? There are all these things and studies you need to do to show that the procedure works as expected in your hands at your laboratory, and that's the validation process.
And did you receive training in other identifiers or other kits while at that location?
Yes, so while there, we used a kit called Identifiler. We also used a kit called Y-Filer, which was specific for males, only found on the Y chromosome. And then we also validated a kit called Mini-Filer, which was very good for degraded or low-level DNA. It was a very sensitive kit for smaller pieces of DNA.
And did you utilize different extraction methods while at that lab?
I did. There we did helix extraction, organic extraction, and then we validated something called DNA IQ, which is a bead-based extraction method.
Can you generally explain what you mean by those in basic terms?
Sure. I mean, they're all, an extraction method is a way to break open the cells that are present in a given sample. Let's say you have a blood stain or a saliva stain. In order to get at the DNA that's in there, you have to get to the nucleus of the cell. So you have to break open the cell, and then you want to pretty much get rid of everything except that purified, isolated DNA, because there's lots of other stuff in the cell. There's the cell membrane, there's different organelles, all these other things that you're not interested in. You just want the DNA. So all of these methods, that's what they accomplish. They're just different ways to go about the same process. Some are more sensitive than others. Some are better at removing inhibitors. So you want to have, sometimes you want to have a couple of different ways to extract a sample.
And I assume while you were there, you also wrote reports about any of the findings you did?
I did, yes.
And did you review or technically review other analysts' work?
I did.
Did you ever testify in court as an expert while working there?
I did, yes.
And generally, when you were at that lab, whom did you work with from like a law or criminal case capacity?
It was mostly for law enforcement agencies, but we did also do work for defense agencies as a private lab. Again, you're going to take work from whomever, but we did, because our lab director was a former Carlsbad police officer, we tended to get a lot of law enforcement cases.
Would you have contract with agencies or counties, or would it be individual casework?
It would be both. We did have some contracts with some law enforcement agencies, and then again, we also would just get individual cases from various different agencies around the state and country.
And at some point, did you leave the crime scene technology?
Well, I did, because it shut down. So in 2008, the lab closed. The lab director passed away unexpectedly, and it stayed open for a short time after that. But eventually, with the economy in 2007, 2008, it just wasn't feasible to keep the laboratory open, so it did close in 2008.
And then what was the next thing you did after that lab closed?
That is when I began consulting, since I found myself without a job in a short time period. So I began consulting at that time and just kind of reached out to some of the contacts that I had through my prior work. And I've been consulting since that time, which basically means I review other analysts' work from other agencies. I look at their policies and procedures. It's basically a technical review of someone else's work, of a work in a different laboratory.
And what kind of review, what would you look at when you're reviewing another lab's report?
So I don't just look at their report. I want to also look at all of their bench notes or the underlying data, make sure that they followed their own policies and procedures, that they tested all of the appropriate items, that the controls, the positive and negative controls, worked as expected, and that the report is accurate. They accurately reported all of the results, that their conclusions are accurate, that they interpreted their mixtures appropriately. And then, sometimes as a consultant, my role is to kind of explain the DNA testing process or explain the results to the attorney who has hired me, because a lot of times they don't really have maybe a lot of understanding of how DNA works, or what does it mean if a DNA profile is found in a certain location. So that's also kind of part of my job as a consultant.
Is it fair to say that's what you did with me?
I try, yes. Yes, indeed.
Now, when you say you want to see if they followed their policy and procedures manual, then you had to ask her to get a copy of that procedure manual, correct?
Yes.
And that's something that, if you could request, is readily available from the department. They hand those over.
Yes, it's typically not an issue to get a copy of the lab's policies and procedures.
Now, while you were having your consulting firm, did you do any other work for other companies?
I did. While I was consulting, I also entered into basically a contract position with another private laboratory called Human Identification Technologies, where I was not a full-time employee, but I worked for them performing casework. And so I, got back into the proficiency test rotation and did some training there, and then started doing casework. Then their technical leader left, and since I had the proper qualifications, I did take over as interim technical leader. And that was from 2009, 2010 time period.
You do casework. Did they ever get a criminal investigation type casework at that lab?
Yes, yes.
And when you were there, what side did you usually work with at that lab?
It varied, although I did do some work for Fresno County, and then we had a contract with Hawaii Police Department and did a number of cases for them as well.
Did you get to fly to Hawaii?
No, I never did. I was hoping, but no.
And again, since you took over interim technical leader, I assume you reviewed other people's work as well?
I did, yes.
And were you also a DNA and GPA auditor during this time?
I was, and so that kind of started way back when I worked for the Department of Law Enforcement in Florida. All accredited labs are required to be audited by an external agency every 2 years. And in order to accomplish that, there was an agency called the National Forensic Science Technology Center that received grants from the federal government to help perform all of these audits. And so what they would do is they would train forensic scientists on how to perform the audit. So I was trained by FBI personnel to perform the FBI Quality Assurance Standards audit. And then when I was available, I would basically enter into a contract with this National Forensic Science Technology Center to go to other labs and help with external audits.
And how long did you do that?
I was, available for a number of years as an auditor, but I only probably did maybe about 3 external audits. Just my schedule didn't permit too many.
And then while you also had a consulting firm, did you have employment with another location?
Yes, so in 2015, I opened a small laboratory where I did DNA collection. That's where I had an instrument called an MVAC. I still have that facility open where I'm not doing DNA testing there. It is just DNA collection. Originally, I was also doing serology testing there. However, in 2017, March of 2017, that's when I started as laboratory director of the private lab where I'm currently employed. And so I've moved all the serology testing to that facility. I also have another MVAC that I bought for that facility. And so I kind of do both.
And that lab that you're describing there, what's the name of that lab?
So that was Ryan Forensic Advanced Serology Laboratory.
And then you have, where you're the lab director, what's that one?
Pure Gold Forensics.
And so that's where you work now?
Yes.
And Pure Gold Forensic Laboratory, is that accredited?
Yes, we received, that was kind of why I was hired to help get the lab accredited, to update the quality assurance manual, write protocols, do validation studies. And so I did all of that with my colleague, and we did receive our accreditation in August of last year.
And so currently you do three things. You're a consultant for Ryan DNA Consulting. You do collection for Ryan Forensic, or excuse me, Advanced Serology Lab, and then you're also the lab director for Pure Gold Forensic.
Yes.
One person, multiple hats.
Yes.
And during this time of your employment, did you have any publications that where you published things on DNA?
Yes. So I have two publications that were in peer-reviewed journals, but the majority of my publications have been for example, there was a print magazine and an online magazine called lawofficer.com. Well, Law Officer Magazine and lawofficer.com. I wrote a number of articles for them about DNA-related issues. I wrote an article for Forensic Magazine on touch transfer DNA, and then the two peer-reviewed publications where I was co-author of, there were many co-authors. It was on a new amplification kit.
And then the other one was in the Journal of Cold Case Review?
Yes, and that was just a review article on some of the new DNA technology that is currently available.
Now, were you actually involved in presenting DNA theories or processes to groups or seminars?
I am occasionally, yes.
And you say you probably did about 18 of those? That sound right?
That sounds about right, yes.
I counted.
Okay, then that's right.
And I'll go through some you've done. You've done one with the National Defender Investigator Association?
Yes, I've done a number, probably about 4 or 5 presentations for that organization at various different times and locations.
And what does that association, who do they cater to?
Mostly defense attorneys or defense investigators.
And then you've done some presentations at American Investigative Society at Cold Case Conference?
Yes.
And I think you have 3 of them there?
Yes, I have.
And who does that conference usually cater to?
Law enforcement.
And it's usually about the cold cases and how to deal with DNA to help solve those cold cases?
Yes, yeah, cold case homicide investigators, yes.
And then did you also present at a cold case homicide seminar a couple times?
At least, well, yes, actually, yes. So that was in Myrtle Beach, yes. It was a 2-day seminar, and I did one of the days all about DNA from beginning to end, testing as well as collection, new techniques and technologies.
And who attended that seminar?
Those were cold case homicide investigators.
And then you also do a presentation of the Regional Organized Crime Information Center?
Yes, that was last year, and that was a large conference. About 350 homicide investigators attended that.
And you also did some training for at least one law enforcement agency down Palm Bay?
Yes.
And then multiple presentations to different either public defender office or alternative public defender offices in California?
That's correct.
And then you also did a presentation at the American Academy of Forensic Sciences Conference?
Yes, that was a panel discussion, so it was 3 of us kind of from different perspectives. Forensic scientists, there was an attorney, there was a defense attorney, and we were answering questions about various different topics in DNA.
And who attended that conference?
So the American Academy of Forensic Sciences are mostly other forensic scientists, but there also are lawyers, pathologists. It's the largest group or organization of forensic scientists.
And I'll start there. Are you a member of that?
I am, yes.
And you have been for a number of years?
I have, yes. I'm a full member now. For a while I was associate member or a student. I was a student affiliate member initially and just kind of moved up.
And let's go through your other memberships. You have a membership, you're certified as a diplomat in molecular biology for the American Board of Criminalists.
Right, so that's basically a certification. You have to take a test on molecular biology and DNA and pass that test in order to be certified by that organization. At the time, it was voluntary. Our field is now moving towards making that a mandatory part of being a forensic scientist.
And you're also selected as a member of the review board for the American Investigative Society of Cold Cases?
Yes.
And what does that group, what do they really do?
So we receive cold case files from different agencies, police agencies, and we go through them, you know, all of the investigative notes, all of the testing. So I'm their DNA expert, but there's also, you know, psychologists and criminalists, behavioralists, that everybody's looking at it with different perspective. Everyone brings their own unique experience and background. And so we're all reviewing the same case, and then we meet and discuss that case and try to offer suggestions to the submitting agency about what steps they should or could take. And that's all pro bono, as well as I do MVAC collection for that organization pro bono.
And you're also a member of the California Association of Criminalists?
I am, yes.
And I want to talk to you about how you process evidence. You talked about the MVAC. For that, we were also going to do a demonstration, I think, as well for the jury.
Yes.
If it works for the court, can we take the short morning brief recess now so we can set that up?
Sure. We'll take our morning recess a little bit early, 15 minutes. Keep in mind the admonitions previously given to you, not to form or express any opinions about the case, not to discuss the case. We'll see everyone back in about 15 minutes.